my name is Andrew Sweeney. Welcome to my podcast. Today I'm going to talk about Slavoj Zizek and his article in The Independent on Jordan Peterson. Incidentally, this is the most popular Medium article I've written so far, and I believe that Zizek read it and responded. I'm going to put links to that response after. I can't say for certain that he was responding to this particular article, but it seemed to be a point-by-point rebuttal in many ways. So again, I could be wrong here. And I also want to say that I enjoy Zizek's work very much, and I just thought his article in The Independent was quite weak. So here goes. So I always liked Slavoj Zizek. Last year I read 3 massive tomes of his work. Getting lost in the forest of Zizek is like being in a dense jungle. Eventually you get to a clearing and discover a flash of insight, even if most of the time you feel somewhat lost in an impenetrable tangle of Lacanian theory and provocation. I kept reading him for those flashes of insight, and yet I never really got what he stood for. His essence remained obscure to me. Zizek is a master storyteller, a great comedian, a feast of words, perhaps a black magician. But this year I also discovered Jordan B. Peterson's work, and I've often meditated on the differences between the two men. Not just their political differences. Peterson calls himself a classic liberal and Zizek a communist, but their essential differences as personality types as well. Peterson's work on the Big 5 personality traits has helped me some in this respect. Zizek and Peterson are obviously high in trait openness and IQ, that is, creativity and abstraction. But Peterson is far more conscientious and Zizek is far more neurotic. The differences can be seen in body language. Peterson's suits and gentlemanly demeanor versus Zizek's designer t-shirts and wild hair. Zizek's apparent indifference to personal hygiene and constant twitching versus Peterson's suits and poised, charismatic presence. Of course, while grooming and style might seem like an irrelevant subject, it is also analogous to how they both write and talk. Zizek comes up with a huge book every couple of years, whereas Peterson spent many years writing and rewriting his first book, Maps of Meaning. Peterson has said that he wrote and rewrote every sentence of that book over 10 times to get each word perfect. Zizek, on the other hand, seems to write at the speed he thinks and speaks, in a voluminous cloud. In interviews, Zizek tends to swarm his opponent in this cloud, whereas Peterson, while he talks a lot, appears to listen deeply to what the other is saying. Recently, Zizek wrote an uncharacteristically short hit piece on Peterson in The Independent, which surprised the hell out of me for a couple of reasons. Firstly, he obviously hadn't done any research, and he had fallen for every kind of caricature which the media has propped up against Peterson. Peterson is described as an alt-right figure who represents the liberal silent majority, a sort of quack psychologist with no real scientific credentials. The appearance of cold scientific argumentation, he writes, totally blind to the inner antagonisms and inconsistencies of the liberal project itself. Basically, Zizek was parroting the usual Marxist idea about the inner contradictions of capitalism and was strawmanning Peterson without having even looked into Peterson's scientific credentials or his serious study of Nietzsche, Jung, totalitarianism, evolutionary biology, and the psychology of the Bible. How disappointing, and yet, at the same time, how revealing. Why would Zizek write such a poorly researched propaganda piece? Why wouldn't he make a serious attack on any weakness in Peterson's actual ideas? The cynic might say, he did it because Peterson is the sujet du jour, or he did it for money. Even if Peterson were a monster of the alt-right, it would be wrong to say that he is not sophisticated, a dedicated monster with a compelling thesis. Zizek could have asked, why doesn't Peterson come out against Ayn Rand individualism? Isn't Peterson a bit of a social Darwinist? While making a compelling argument against his actual ideas. Instead, Zizek accused Peterson of being an anti-immigrant, transphobic, and a conspiracy theorist, all of which, after having read Maps of Meaning and listened to hundreds of classroom lectures of Dr. Peterson, I don't find a scrap of evidence for. As I wrote in my first Medium article on Peterson, hilariously, since Peterson is falsely caricatured again and again as alt-right, he has never actually voiced a particularly Republican view. He has never said he is against gay marriage, gun control, or abortion. Neither has he said he is anti-immigration or pro-death penalty. Incidentally, Zizek is pro-capital punishment. Peterson has, however, had the guts to dialogue with people on the right, which means he acts in accordance with his principles of dialogue and humanism. Free speech is also the freedom to say nothing and not be roped into virtue signaling of all kinds. Peterson has had the composure to keep to the subject matter at hand, which is the civil rights issue of compelled speech. I've been wanting Peterson to have real conversations with people on the left for a while, and I'm gratified to see that he has talked to Russell Brand recently. Perhaps I want this because I'm a temperamental lefty, which corresponds to my score on the Big Five personality test designed by Peterson and his team. I'm also high in openness and a bit neurotic. Perhaps this is one reason why I resonate with Zizek in the first place, along with my love of provocateurs and comedians. Peterson has spoken with many comedians, and I hope he will talk to Zizek in the future. And I can agree with Zizek that the left doesn't have its house in order, especially since the left, and Zizek in this case, can't make a serious, well-reasoned argument against his enemies. He obviously could, if he hadn't been so lazy. Or even know who his enemies are. Zizek, like Cathy Newman, addresses not Peterson, but a caricature. Recently in an interview, I heard Zizek criticize the Marxist preference for action over philosophy. I am a good Hegelian. If you have a good theory, forget about reality, he says. Again, this is a provocation. It is funny. It is very postmodern. Postmodernism is a critique of reified truth and depicts authenticity as the biggest fakery. Fiction is the only reality. Reality is for the over-earnest. That is what Zizek is saying. This couldn't be more opposed to Peterson's emphasis on logos or truth speech. What matters to Zizek is theory and fictions, not logos. Peterson, on the other hand, believes that speaking the truth and not telling lies is the road to salvation. Of course, Zizek is a provocateur, and a good one. Here is another. Because the horror of communism, Stalinism, is not that bad people do bad things, they always do. It's that good people do horrible things, thinking they are doing something great. Okay, but then why does Zizek still consider himself a communist and wax poetically about the dictatorship of the proletariat? What about the internal contradictions of communism? What about all those horrors? Peterson often criticizes those who say that wasn't real communism, because every actual communist country has had gulags and concentration camps. So what is real communism? Would Zizek say it doesn't exist, but theory is more important than facts anyway? Finally, if you don't want to read the big books of Zizek as I have, although admittedly they are a lot of fun, someone has boiled down his thought to its essence on a Twitter feed attributed to him. Note, I have since learned that the Twitter account is fake. However, I do believe they are still his words. For instance, I hope I don't disappoint you, but there is no master. I'm afraid you have. The shocking realization is that the throne is empty. The self is the fetishized illusion of a substantial core of subjectivity, where in reality there is nothing. These are some quotes from Zizek. Zizek is a great intellectual comedian, I'll give him that. But the winner is Peterson. Peterson is actually leading a real revolution of the proletariat.